Good evening. I'm Cheryl Kaiser, Chair of the Psychology Department, and I have the distinct honor of welcoming you to our 13th Annual Edwards Public Lecture Series. I'm pleased you could join the Department of Psychology tonight as we celebrate this year's lecture series titled Optimizing Human Potential. Tonight's lectures mark the beginning of our 3-week series exploring how psychological science improves insights into the mind, brain, and behavior, resulting in improved outcomes for people and societies. Before this evening's lecturers share their research with you, I'd like to address a few housekeeping issues. Please note, tonight we'll have 2 lectures, separated with a 10-minute break in between them. We'll have Q&A at the end of the second lecture, and we'll have microphones available at the side for you to come down and ask questions to the speakers. And please remember to silence your phone before we begin tonight's lectures. I'd like to share a little bit about how this series came about. This annual lecture series is the result of generous support from Professor Alan Edwards, who made a substantial gift to our department in an endowment that ensures that we can share the latest science going on in our department with you free of charge. Professor Edwards was a member of our department for half a century, from his arrival in 1944 until his passing in 1994. He was an outstanding teacher, scholar, and writer whose textbooks changed the way we think about modern statistical practices. The Edwards family contribution exemplifies the impact that support from our community can have on psychology's ability to educate the public. Thank you to those of you in this room who have already supporters of our department. Your generosity is critical to creating opportunities for UW Psychology to solve some of the most important issues facing our society, as well as support training and education opportunities for our undergraduates and graduate students. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce tonight's first speaker. Dr. Mary Larimer received her Ph.D. in clinical psychology from the University of Washington, a proud Husky, in 1992, after completing her internship at Brown University. She joined the UW Psychology faculty in 1995 and is currently Professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and Professor of Psychology and Director of the Center for the Study of Health and Risk Behaviors. Her primary research interests include the etiology and health disparities, prevention and treatment of alcohol use disorders and related comorbid conditions. She's published more than 200 articles and chapters and has worked with populations ranging from adolescents and college students to chronically homeless adults. In addition to a diverse portfolio of state and federally funded research, she's director of a pre- and postdoctoral training program funded by the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, which includes both clinical and behavioral neuroscience research training. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dr. Mary Larimer.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you, everybody, for being here. It's a genuine honor for me to be able to talk about the work that I have been doing over the past 30 years, or a bit more, I should say. And I hope that the work that I have to share with you will be useful to you in your own work and your own life. I'm going to be talking about college student drinking. I titled it Myths, Facts, and Prevention Approaches, and I think I will successfully be able to address all 3 of those in the next 45 minutes. So here we go. I want to start by really honoring my beginnings. Much of the research on college drinking etiology and prevention started here at the University of Washington. My mentor, Alan Marlatt, was one of the leading influences in this field and continues to be, though he passed away 7 years ago. And also, I can't forgo the opportunity to give a nod to the Addictive Behaviors Research Center. This was one of the buildings that just came down this last week to make space for the new and very exciting population health initiative building. It is with some, bittersweet memories in terms of, seeing the building go, but the work that was begun there continues all around the world. So I want to start by addressing why study college students. When we first started doing this research, and even today, people say, well, college students, they're the best and the brightest. They don't have any real problems. There was a perception that, in fact, they were somehow not quite real people. They were just a sample of convenience that we were studying because we were on college campuses. So I would like to start by convincing you that college students are an important population to study for a variety of reasons, not least of which is that they are real people and they have real concerns. There are more than 20 million college students nationwide. About 12 million of whom are under the age of 25. It is increasingly the case that college enrollment is moving up into ages older than the traditional college age of 18 to 24, and also younger than the traditional college age of 18 to 24. Nonetheless, a large majority are within, or a large population are within the ages of 18 to 24, which is a particular developmental age span that I also study. About 69% of high school graduates nationwide attend either a 2- or a 4-year school immediately after high school. About 80% go at some point within the next 5 or 6 years. At any given time, about 40% of the population between ages 18 to 24 are enrolled in college. So this is a very large portion of the young adult age group. And this includes both 2- and 4-year colleges as well as technical and trade schools. It is also the case that college students are increasingly diverse. Enrollment in college has increased significantly over the past 30 years. Today, over half of the students are women, 56% in fact, so women outnumber men on college campuses. Some of the gains in college enrollment have been particularly notable in the Hispanic, Latino, Latina population, where rates of enrollment have risen to about 37% of individuals in the 18 to 24 age range are attending university or college. Same has been similar gains in Black and African American populations. And there's increasing socioeconomic diversity on college campuses. So it is not the case that all college students are privileged, wealthy, and white. In fact, it is very much not the case as time goes on. I must say, however, that these gains have not affected all populations equally. It continues to be the case that individuals who are from higher socioeconomic status to begin with also have higher rates of college enrollment, higher rates of access to college. And it has also been the case that some populations have not been as fully able to take advantage of this increase in college enrollment, including Asian Pacific Islander communities and Native American Alaska Native communities continue to have lower rates of college enrollment. So we have made progress in terms of making college something that is accessible for everyone, but there is still considerable room to go. There is very good evidence that completing college leads to success in life. 64% higher average income for individuals who have a bachelor's degree compared to a high school diploma, for example. The unemployment rate among individuals who have a bachelor's degree is currently 2.5%, which is considered to be the basement rate of unemployment when you consider that people have to be unemployed for a brief period of time when they're changing jobs or just about to start a new job. So it's about half that of high school graduates. And there's also considerable evidence that individuals who complete college, including both 2- and 4-year colleges, have higher career and life satisfaction. They have higher levels of civic engagement, and they volunteer more often and more than individuals who have lower levels of educational attainment. And that continues as the level of educational attainment increases. So moving from 2-year college to bachelor's degree to master's degree and doctoral and professional education. So there's good reason to think that we want to encourage success in college for all our young people. Unfortunately, not all young people succeed in college. And in fact, if you look at national statistics on graduation rates, only about 59% of individuals who enroll in college in a given year will have completed their bachelor's degree within six years. And only about 36% receive their bachelor's degree within 4 years. So college is taking longer, and a number of individuals are not attaining the degree at the end of the college period. When you look at community colleges, only about 5% of community college students finish their degree within 2 years. The rate of finishing within 6 years is fairly similar, however, to a 4-year university. It takes about 57% of full-time community college students, at least, complete their degree within 6 years. However, many students attend community college on a part-time basis due to a variety of economic, family, and other pressures. And those who are attending part-time, only about 39% actually achieve a degree from their community college within 6 years. So there is considerable room for us to make improvements in attainment of this goal that we know will improve individuals' life trajectory. We also know that health and mental health conditions have a major impact on academic success of students. So this is from the American College Health Association survey of over 27,000 students. And when you ask students what is impairing your academic success, what are things that get in the way? Over 34% say stress. 26% report that anxiety is impairing their academic performance. 22% report sleep difficulties. 16% depression, 15% there are other work responsibilities. Other health conditions come after those conditions. You get, cold, flu, sore throat, those kinds of physical concerns. Another 10% report that concerns for their friends and family members are interfering with their academic success, and 10% participation in their extracurricular activities. You will note that only about less than 4% say alcohol use is impairing their academic success, and about 1.5% say other drug use is impairing their academic success. Students don't necessarily self-report that their alcohol and substance use is impairing their academic success. However, alcohol and substance use are comorbid with all of the conditions that individuals list as impairing their academic success. And being able to tie those things together is sometimes very helpful in terms of helping people find reasons and motivation to make changes. And there is good reason to consider alcohol use as a major factor that impairs academic success. When you look at rates of alcohol use in college, this is the highest lifetime prevalence of alcohol use and alcohol use disorders. And so what you see is that in the past year, about 80% of college students report that they have used any alcohol, and 60.7% report that they have been drunk. When you look at the past month, 63% report any use, about 41% report that they have been drunk, 32% report that they have engaged in heavy use, heavy episodic use, which is 5 or more drinks on a single occasion. And about 11% report that they have had 10 or more drinks on an occasion at least once in the past 30 days. And 4% report that they have had 15 or more drinks at least once in the past 30 days. So what you see is a few things to note from this. One is that not all college students drink. In fact, most students drink moderately or not at all most of the time. And that is something that we have to consider when we're thinking about the messages that we give about what college is like and what the environment is like with respect to drinking. The other thing is that rates of heavy drinking and extreme drinking in terms of 10 or more or 15 or more drinks are something that we also need to consider. So while most students drink moderately or not at all most of the time, some are also engaging in very problematic types of drinking that can lead to a number of harmful consequences. It's important to note that alcohol is not the only substance that college students use. So if you look at rates of other substance use, about 42% report that they have used any illicit drug in the last year. Most of that is accounted for by the use of marijuana. I'm reporting national rates here. Washington rates are higher, as you might expect. So in terms of any illicit drugs other than marijuana, about 20% report use of any other illicit drug in the past year. And the only drugs that approach 10% are Adderall and other amphetamines. I presented some of the national data regarding alcohol use and the peak rates in college, just to look at some local data. These are high school students who were assessed in Washington State prior to graduating from high school, and then followed for the next year, whether they went into university, two-year college, or into the workforce. And what you see when that blue line that goes all the way up is that it's very clear here in Washington State that the transition to college is associated with much greater increases in drinking than are associated with the transition to workforce, and that community college students tend to fall somewhere in the middle of that for both use and consequences. And similarly, drawing from data that my colleague Christine Lee has been collecting here in the King County area, looking at young adults who are in various walks of life, you see that on the left, when you compare peak number of drinks or highest number of drinks on an occasion and typical number of drinks in a week among those who are not in school, who are in a 2-year college, a 4-year college, or are college graduates, individuals in a 4-year college here in Washington State, again, consume more alcohol than individuals who are in other settings. There's a little bit less variability related to work site, but if you compare those who are not working to those who are working part-time and those who are working full-time, you can see that relative to those working part-time, both unemployed and full-time workers are drinking more. One of the things that it's important to consider is that young adults are not just in school or just working, but many are doing both. And we find that the combination of being a full-time student and working full-time is particularly related to increased alcohol use for this age group. So that's those teal bars. You can see it if you look at just among those who work full-time by education status, and you see the same kind of pattern on the right side for those who are working full-time and are going to school. So there's good reason to believe, as I mentioned, that there's a relationship between alcohol use and academic success. The research on this has demonstrated that alcohol use is associated with increased sleepiness. I mentioned that sleep disturbance was the third most commonly reported issue that was affecting a student's performance. So it's related to sleepiness, and through sleepiness to lower grades. Heavier drinking is related to lower GPA. Heavy episodic drinking, or consuming 5 or more drinks on an occasion, is related to less likelihood to interact with faculty on research universities, which interaction with faculty is part of what helps promote both success and engagement in school, retention in school, and also further academic attainment. And then there are a number of alcohol-related negative consequences that students report, and I'm only going to just share a few of them here, but there are many others. About 35% in the past 12 months of students who drink said that they did something they later regretted after drinking. 30% forgot where they were or what they did. In other words, they experienced an alcohol-related blackout. 22% reported that they engaged in unprotected sex as a result of drinking, and 13.6% had physically injured themselves. And these injuries can be rather serious. In fact, the leading causes of death among college students are accidents, suicides, and homicides. These are generally healthy young adults. They don't tend to die from other diseases at high rates. So what you see is that the majority of fatalities in this age group are related to these things. And research suggests that over 1,500 student deaths a year in the US are related to alcohol-related injuries. These include things like auto accidents, falls, drownings, gunshot wounds, alcohol overdose, et cetera. So when you think about alcohol's role in both non-fatal and fatal accidents, this is something that I think we all need to be concerned about. And finally, there's a perception that drinking in college is somehow a time out, that it's a period of time when you can engage in high-risk activities around alcohol and substance use without really having any significant impact on your later life trajectory. The epidemiological research does not suggest that to be the case. In fact, about 18 to 30% of college students passed your criteria for an alcohol use disorder, depending on which study you look at. And about 40% of those will continue to have an alcohol use disorder after they graduate. In fact, most recently, the epidemiological data are suggesting that although rates of drinking overall are coming down and have been coming down for many years in young adult and older populations, that we are seeing less of a maturing out phenomena than we used to see, where it used to be that there was a sort of a more confined period of peak drinking around the late teens through the mid-20s, and then it came down more sharply. Now it seems to be maintaining well into the late 20s and even into the 30s in some cases. Part of that has to do with delaying entering of more adult roles like marriage and parenting and buying a house and getting a full-time job. Some of it has to do with the fact that some of the work sites that individuals are going into have similar kinds of characteristics to the colleges they came out of, and therefore some of the protective effects that used to be conferred by work are not happening as much as they used to. So there's really good reason to think that it would be helpful for us to address issues related to alcohol use while students are still in college and we know how to find them. I must say that this is not a new problem. So some of the earliest research on the topic of college student drinking was actually published in the 1940s and the 1950s. These are really fascinating articles to read. It was definitely recognized at that time that there was something that we might want to pay attention to. However, most of the research that really looked at what are the factors that contribute to drinking in this age group and what can we do about it did not begin to occur until the 80s. In response to the fact that there was recognition that alcohol use could be an issue, there were a lot of traditional prevention approaches that were tried. A lot of well-meaning, really well-meaning traditional alcohol use and drug use prevention programs. So, basically, the idea that alcohol has harmful effects. Most of these were based on the idea that if students and young people only understood all the harmful things that could happen when they drank, just the kind of information I just gave you, they would surely change their behavior and come into line with more helpful, less harmful behavioral patterns. One of the things that traditional alcohol prevention approaches yielded was a lot of really funny spoofs on on the messages, most of which were not taken terribly seriously. So one of the problems with these traditional alcohol prevention approaches was that they were not based on any theoretical logic model of why individuals drank and how people changed their behavior. Most of the programs had not been empirically tested, and when they were empirically tested, they were not found to be effective. In fact, there's some evidence that some of these programs, again, very well-meaning, well-distributed programs, might have actually had harmful effects in terms of increasing the misperception that drinking is very normative. Another failure of these prevention approaches was that alcohol and drug knowledge does not equal alcohol and drug behavior change. In other words, you can be an extremely well-informed drinker or drug user. In fact, many people are. So in response to this kind of, prevention efforts that were very, deeply motivated to make helpful changes, when you see that changes aren't happening, it's very tempting to point fingers at the people who are not changing, to tell them all the things they're doing wrong, to throw up your hands. There's nothing that can be done. There's absolutely nothing we can do about this. Kids are always going to drink. There's no point in trying. All those kinds of reactions happen all the time, and certainly have happened over the years. What we've tried to do, instead of throwing up our hands, not that we haven't on occasion thrown up our hands, is to really think about what are the factors that influence any individual's behavior, whether it be drinking or anything else. How do those factors relate to alcohol use behavior specifically in college, and how can we design intervention approaches that really address those targets so that instead of just trying things that seem like a good idea to us or that we think would work with our own kids, we might actually be able to bring the science to bear on the prevention. I'm not going to talk about this. I know there's a lot of words here, but what I'm going to say is that there are a very large number of factors that influence how much a person drinks and how much a person in college drinks and when and under what circumstances and what harmful consequences they experience. I'm going to talk about a few of these areas today. I'm going to talk about some peer influences. I'm going to talk about some environmental influences. I'm going to talk a little bit about some cognitive factors and some comorbidity factors. And my colleague, Dr. Tracy, is going to talk a lot about parents and families who have a really important role to play here. So, starting with some of the peer influences and normative factors, college drinking is widely depicted as both extremely normative and funny. And these kinds of depictions in the media, in TV, in advertising, in movies, they contribute to and also reflect a culture of heavy drinking. And what you find is there's reciprocity there where, you know, the more that students drink, the more that gets into the media, the more the media reflects that back, the more students think everybody drinks. And that kind of process can really influence the perception that this is a normative and not problematic behavior. It's also the case that in college you have a lot of people who are living with other people who are similar to them in age and often in behavior. And what we know is that rates of heavy drinking are impacted by seeing heavy drinking models and by drinking with other people who drink heavily. So research that was done here, this is again a sentimental favorite. This is a picture of the bar lab that's here at the University of Washington. Much of this research was done here at the University of Washington in this bar lab. What we know is that if you are with somebody who is drinking more than you are, you will tend to match your drinking to that influence, and you will not be aware that you're doing it. And so what you find is that if you pair people with a heavy drinking model, in some of this research, they drink about 1.5 times as much as the students who were paired with a lighter drinking model. And they were unaware that their behavior had been influenced by the people with whom they were drinking. All of these factors contribute to the perception that drinking is even more common than it is. Remember, I said most students drink moderately or not at all most of the time, but the perception is that all students drink all the time. And part of this has to do with the fact that we make our estimates of what is normative, what is common, based on the behavior that we see, that we observe. If you think about driving on the freeway, and you think about what cars you notice. What cars do you notice when you're driving on the freeway for a while? The ones going fast. The ones going slow. The ones cutting you off. Also the ones that are like yours. And all of those things influence us when we are judging where our behavior fits in the normative spectrum. We tend to notice things that stand out, not things that are the same as everything else. And we also tend to notice things that are like us. So when you think about drinking, you tend to notice the person who's drinking a lot. They tell funny stories about it. They get sick. They do things that, are outside the norm. However, that influences our perception that that is the norm. And those normative misperceptions have been shown to drive drinking. And then contextually, if you think about young adults in general, all of us in some ways, and certainly within a college student academic year, drinking varies tremendously throughout the course of a typical academic year. It's not that students are drinking all the time the same amount, but rather at the beginning of the year they drink because they're just getting on campus, then they tail off before the final exams. Their drinking comes up around Thanksgiving, around New Year's, around spring break, St. Patrick's Day, etc. All of these are contextual influences that, again, are having an impact on their decision-making and their drinking, often without their recognition, our recognition. And this varies on a daily level as well. So there's just tremendous variability when you think about what times of the year are more and less risky. However, these high-risk events, first of all, we have a couple of advantages when we're trying to address college student drinking, and one of them is we know when these events happen for the most part. So there's been a lot of epidemiological data that look at how these events influence drinking. And the other is that we can really tailor our prevention programming to these specific events and help reduce the drinking during those periods of time, which also has been shown to generalize to reducing drinking later on as well. I mentioned I would talk a little bit about some social influences on alcohol use. So I have to show the bar lab again because I have to show the bar lab all the time. My very first research was serving as a bartender in the bar lab with Alan Marlatt, doing some of these placebo drinking studies. And one of the things that this research has shown is that people's drinking, our drinking, is influenced by our belief about what drinking will do for us. And we have many positive expectations about what drinking will do. And we have these expectations even if we never drink, and we have them even when we are children. So the research suggests that expectations or expectancies about alcohol's effects begin to form in early childhood. Many of these are placebo effects. So when you do research where you tell somebody that they're going to get alcohol and they actually get alcohol, they might be talkative, outgoing, they're funny, they feel more sexy, a lot of positive social effects, and that's what most people report they drink for. If you tell somebody that they're going to get alcohol, but you actually give them a drink that looks and smells and tastes like alcohol, and it's given to them in a bar by a bartender, but it actually doesn't have any alcohol in it at all, they tend to become talkative, social, funny, they feel more sexy. So most of the positive social benefits of alcohol can be heavily influenced by placebo effects, expectations, not what's in the drink. Interestingly, if you tell people, today you're in the control group, we're sorry, we're not going to be able to give you any alcohol today, here's a beverage that you can have instead, and we just want you to spend the same amount of time in the bar so that we can control for the people who are getting alcohol. People do not report being outgoing, talkative, funny. What they report is they feel sleepy. They look flushed. They might start taking off their sweaters and stuff because it's a little bit too warm in the bar. They get a little clumsy. And what they don't do is say, hey, what did you put in my drink? They don't attribute it to alcohol. They attribute it to other environmental influences. So this research suggests that a lot of what students are hoping to get from alcohol they could probably get either without alcohol or at much lower doses that are associated with a lot fewer harmful consequences. And then finally, again, compliments of my colleague Christine Lee and the Transitions Project, we have to consider that this time of life is a really, really complicated developmental period. There is a lot going on for young adults. They're experiencing all kinds of transitions in their life most of the time. So Dr. Lee has looked specifically at micro-transitions. So we've talked, many of you have thought about, sort of major transitions that young adults go through. They go to college or they get a job, they get their relationship, they get married, they become parents, etc. Those things sound like nice, linear, fixed-in-time milestones. In reality, they are very fluid, and there's changes in those areas that are happening all the time. So if you think about a relationship, you might have a first date, you might get a little more serious, and something goes wrong, they break up with you by text message, it's all very bad. Then there's another, you meet somebody else, you're very excited, you have a first date, etc. It's not linear, and it's very, very fluid and fluctuating. Similarly, if you think about work, what many young adults are encountering is things like they are taking a part-time job, they get their hours cut, they get laid off, they get promoted, they're asked to become full-time, etc. All of that happening at the same time. And if you think about all of those areas of life all coinciding at the same time, you get something that looks like this, which is that all of these transitions are overlapping and occurring simultaneously during this very short period of development. It also looks a little bit like my retirement portfolio, but the point is, it's no wonder that college students feel stressed. There's really a lot going on, and that's before you consider the homework and the volunteering and the service work that they do and the research work that they do and other things that young adults in college are doing all the time. And these are very, very common types of micro-transitions as well. So some of Christine's work shows that in any given month, between 37 and 50% of the young adults in her sample had a work transition, had a living situation micro-transition, had some issue occur with their romantic relationships or their education. Her work also suggests that these transitions are associated with drinking, and that particularly when they're experienced, as stressful. So finally, one other issue that I'm going to talk about that relates to how science can inform prevention is that most of what the traditional prevention approaches do is try to convince people that the ways in which they're behaving are not the right way to behave. They're not helpful. They try to convince them through education. They try to convince them through direct persuasion. They may try to convince them through arguments, etc. And what you see is that this kind of direct persuasion creates a sort of a reactance or a barrier to the success of prevention approaches. It leads to an emotional reaction that causes people to really adopt or strengthen the behavior that's contrary to what you're trying to convince them to do. Anybody who's a parent should understand this statement. So basically, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. When you try to persuade, you often have the opposite. And all the arguments for why people shouldn't change stack up. For example, this was in response to a one-drink policy for fraternities. So the good news is, in response to all of this very careful, very systematic, very thorough research that has looked at all the factors that influence drinking by college populations, there has been improvement. The science has actually improved to the extent that interventions for college drinking, prevention approaches, are now more based on theory, more based on solid theory, and are more likely to have beneficial effects. The NIAAA has played a pretty major role in this effort. The National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism has funded research on college drinking starting with the very first intervention studies and some of Alan's very early work, and has funded my entire career. So I'm extremely grateful. And I wouldn't be able to do this work without their support. One of the things that NIAAA did that I thought was really very smart is some years ago now, they convened an expert panel that was not just researchers talking to other researchers, which we often do, but in fact included researchers, college presidents, and college students. And they brought us together to talk about what was going on, what the science said, and what we could do about it, what kinds of efforts, prevention efforts, really had the science behind them to suggest that they would be helpful, and how we could get that information out to people who needed it. So the NIAAA College Drinking Task Force identified 4 tiers of evidence to suggest that interventions were effective. Tier 1 was evidence of effectiveness among college students in multiple studies supporting that approach. Tier 2 was evidence of success with other populations, maybe older adults, maybe younger children, that could be applied to college environments. Tier 3 was things that had evidence of logical and theoretical promise, but required more comprehensive evaluation. And Tier 4 was things that had evidence of ineffectiveness. They had been tested multiple times and they did not work. Most of what I talked about in terms of traditional education approaches fell into Tier 4. And then NIAAA sent this document with all this toolkit of all this information to every college president in the United States. So what's common among these tier 1 strategies that had evidence of effectiveness with college students in multiple studies? Well, it's all the things I just talked about in terms of the etiology. It teaches moderate drinking and life management skills. They do provide education or information, but it's specific to the use of skills that will help prevent the issues that are causing people to drink in a way that is risky for them. It helps to correct misperceived drinking norms. It also helps to enhance motivation to make the change rather than trying to persuade. It's really about having a conversation about what you want, how your current drinking is or is not meeting that goal for you, how you would like things to be different, and what are some strategies that you might be able to use to make it different if you choose to. Primarily eliciting from the student rather than telling the student what they should do. And it also challenges positive alcohol outcome expectancies given some of the placebo drinking research that I showed earlier. Things that differentiate those tier 1 strategies really have to do with the format and the use of personalized feedback as part of the intervention. And so personalized feedback has been one of the strategies that has been shown to increase motivation and actual behavior change repeatedly. There's now more than 70 randomized clinical trials in different populations, including most recently 2-year college populations, again, Christine Lee, 4-year college populations, fraternity members, sorority members, children of alcoholics, athletes, etc. So personalized feedback is the cornerstone of the brief alcohol screening and intervention for college students program, which again was developed here at the University of Washington and has been adapted in many ways. And then the personalized normative feedback component is really, within that personalized feedback, there are some components that specifically challenge that misperception that everybody's drinking all the time. And that component in and of itself has been shown to help influence behavior change without any other intervention. So if you think about it like the sort of nesting dolls, brief motivational interventions like basics, they involve an in-person conversation, they involve personalized feedback, and they help negotiate with the student how they want their drinking to change in order to facilitate their goals. Within that, we have that personalized feedback, which is just a lot of information that they told us that we gave back to them in ways that help them see it in a little bit different light about the things they like and don't like so much about their drinking. And personalized normative feedback is within that. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, here's some information, for example, that might challenge the perception that everybody drinks more than you think they do. This is just an example, but the idea of is that you drink a certain amount, you think everybody drinks more than you. In fact, most people drink less than you, and that has been shown to change behavior with some results lasting up to 2 years post-feedback. We also give feedback about things like blood alcohol content. One of the misperceptions or myths about drinking is that if a little bit is good, more must be better. And what you find is that, in fact, the pleasurable effects of drinking tend to occur at low doses and when the blood alcohol level is slowly and gradually rising. And so beyond BACs of about 0.05 or 0.06, which is a fairly low dose of alcohol, most of the pleasurable effects do not get more pleasant as you continue to increase your drinking. However, the less pleasant effects tend to become more prominent over time. So we provide some information about that and personalize that to the individual. We talk about some of the not so good things about drinking, some of the experiences they've had that they might rather avoid, like getting into fights, not being able to do their homework, etc. These are all things that they report to us. And then we sometimes go into a little bit of depth on some of those, like what causes those day after effects? How does alcohol impact the sleep cycle? Sleep is a major hook for young adults, and it's something that we're trying to study more because young adults are tired. We talk about calories and costs and other things like that. Give them some examples of what else they could do with their money. This is also sometimes very compelling because college students, in addition to being tired, are broke. And so one of the examples, for example, was we worked with a fraternity and we worked with the fraternity pledge class. And one of the things that they concluded after talking about this, monetary feedback is that if they cut their drinking back just by a couple of drinks on an occasion, they would be able to pool the money and fund a scholarship for a student to come to their fraternity. And then we give some tips about protective behaviors that they can take. These are all educational strategies. These are some strategies that have been tried before in some traditional prevention approaches. The difference is we don't tell them, we ask them. What are some things that you have tried? What are some things you might be willing to try? These are some things that students have shared with us have been successful for them. Do you think this would be something that would be useful for you? And it's really up to them what they choose to do. And then we give them some information about standard drinks because that cup that the fraternity members were using was not one drink. And so we give them some reference for what actually is a standard drink and how do you understand how alcohol affects you based on what you've actually put in and over what period of time. So some of my work has shown that we can reduce drinking in fraternities by using this kind of strategy. If you can see this is over the course of the first year in the fraternity. What you see is that the intervention group decreased their drinking. The control group, which got traditional prevention approaches, actually increased their drinking over the course of that year. They're still drinking more heavily than other students. However, this was a statistically significant and a clinically meaningful reduction, and it was associated with reduced consequences as well. The other thing we found, and I'm never quite sure how to feel about these findings, is that training students, peers, to do these interventions was more effective at reducing drinking and consequences than having professionals administer them. The reason I don't know how to feel about this is because I trained the peers, so I felt really good about that, but I was one of the professionals. However, what this suggests is we have a really good labor force that we could train to help other students reduce their drinking. That's students. And they work cheap. We've also shown that just mailing this type of feedback or giving it on the internet can help reduce that increase in alcohol use that you see when students come into college. And so in comparison to individuals who did not receive feedback, the individuals who received that personalized feedback information had much smaller increases in their alcohol use during that transition from high school to college. And I should say, I don't have this slide to show, but another thing is that it increases abstention. So in other words, students who are not drinking before college who receive this feedback were double the likelihood of remaining abstinent at the end of the first year of college in comparison to those who did not. And finally, just those personalized normative feedback messages alone, where you show those graphs and you don't do anything else but just show these graphs like this, it has also been shown to reduce drinking, again, up to 2 years. So we started with, I should say, back when I first started doing this work with Alan, we ran 8-session 2-hour groups. And now we can just send them this normative feedback on the internet. It's not a panacea. So in other words, you're not going to change everybody's drinking by sending them normative feedback. However, it is a really good first step. You can do some brief assessment. You can provide some normative feedback. If students do not resolve their drinking, you can increase the intensity by sending more more comprehensive feedback. What we tend to find is that these little short interventions like this, where you give this normative feedback, you get really very quick response. You can get people to change their drinking within the matter of a week or two. And the more comprehensive feedback sometimes takes a little longer to see the changes. However, it continues to have an impact over time that grows, and we tend to have a little bit larger effect in the long run and longer duration. So we think that really the strategy has to do with the appropriate timing of the appropriate pieces of feedback to the right student at the right time that helps you just sort of build this whole program of behavior change. And once you change one behavior, it's easier to change the next one. So there's, again, good news. And the good news has to do with the fact that this strategy has been effective. About 80% of colleges after the task force report were aware of the report. About half were implementing at least one of the evidence-based strategies. However, only a third were implementing any strategy to deal with those environmental changes that I talked about influencing drinking on college campuses. Only 3% had implemented all the recommendations. 98% of colleges still provided some sort of education that was not evidence-based. And larger universities had better access to these resources and were doing a better job of implementing them. So just very briefly, in response to this, NIAAA again made a major investment in dissemination and implementation of these strategies on college campuses. And they developed a matrix which rates every strategy that has been used in college campuses to prevent alcohol use on cost, effectiveness, the amount of research, what your needs are going to be to implement them, what the barriers are to implementation, et cetera. You can't obviously see all of this, but I would encourage you that if you're interested in this topic, you can get all of this information on www.collegedrinkingprevention.gov/collegeaim, and it includes all the source literature as well as all the decision making that went into rating these strategies. And it also includes planning tools for campuses and decision-making tools for what mix of strategies will work best with your population and which works best with different special populations that you might be working with. So there are a few remaining challenges, just a few. Many college students who need help still do not access it. So there continues to be a dissemination gap, both on the individual level and on the college level. Young adults in community and technical colleges, minority-serving institutions such as tribal colleges and universities, historically black colleges and universities continue to be both underserved and understudied, as are students who are young adults who are not enrolled in college. So we need to find effective ways to reach, identify, and provide evidence-based interventions to both college and non-college young adults, and that's where most of my research is going in the future. There's also a really big need for workforce training. And when I say workforce, I mean the campus workforce as well as the broader workforce that's working with young adults and are accessing these individuals. There's been pretty good reach into primary care and other medical settings, but not nearly as much in work site settings. And on campus, we have a number of resources. I mentioned students, but we also have faculty and we also have staff. Everyone from the financial aid office to the individuals who are working with advising could benefit from learning these strategies and being able to implement them. I continue to look toward the future. So this is our new building that my lab is housed in. I continue to work on cultural adaptation of these approaches, including a very large trial that was just concluded with my colleague Bonnie Duran, Myra Parker. I see Alex Lynch is in the audience who works with us on that, looking at culturally adapting this work for tribal colleges and universities and showing really very impressive effects. There's a number of ways to implement this, and parents are one that Rob is going to come and talk about next, but also things like technology, curriculum infusion, peer health educators. I've got enough to keep me busy until I retire, which will be never. And then we continue to improve the science, and we continue to train the next generation of both alcohol researchers and clinical scientists. So I want to thank you, all of you in the audience. Many of you contributed to this talk. Certainly everybody on the left contributed slides to this talk and various content. And also Krista in particular did a huge job of converting everything to wide format UW template. as well as my family, my colleagues at the ABRC and the Center for the Study of Health and Risk Behaviors, and all the research teams that have contributed. And I also want to thank NIAAA for my funding, as well as NIDA, the Washington State Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery, Alcoholic Beverage Medical Research Foundation, and the UW Royalty Research Fund. Thank you.